All right. Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Assemblywoman Garlow. Assemblyman Gray. Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblyman Hibbets. Assemblyman Koenig. Assemblywoman Newby. Assemblyman Wynn. Assemblyman Ortliger. Assemblywoman Taylor. Assemblywoman Thomas. Chair Peters.
Thank you. I am here. Please mark folks as present as they arrive. I believe we may have one absent excused for a committee hearing. She may show up a little bit later. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. A couple of housekeeping items. Please make sure that your cell phones and computers are muted so we're not interrupting folks as they're presenting. Members of the public may testify in a variety of ways, all of which are listed on the agenda. You may also submit public comment in writing, either in addition to testifying or in lieu thereof. Written public comment may be submitted before, during, or up to 24 hours after the meeting's adjournment. If you wish to testify in person, please sign in by the door and leave a business card so we have an accurate record of your name and contact information. If you do not testify, you may also wish to sign in so that we have a record of those who are interested in particular bills in the event that we would like to contact you later. To ensure an orderly flow of discussion, all comments, questions, and responses must go through me, and also committee members must be recognized by me before you can speak. Additionally, I ask our presenters on the Zoom video call to leave their cameras off and microphones muted until it's your turn to present or I direct questions to you. When testifying in person, please remember to turn the microphone on to speak and off to listen so we can avoid the reverb and have a clean record for our minutes. And with that, we'll move on to our agenda. We have 3 bills on the agenda today. The first, we will be taking them out of order, and we will start today with Senate Bill 177. Welcome, Senator. Glad to have you in our committee today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just have I picked up the wrong folder, so I just sent somebody up to get it. So if we could just
We could be in recess for a
pause
moment.
for just a minute. I just looked down and realized I didn't have both folders with me.
Oh, it's okay.
So
I think
it was one of those errors that get made when you have a crazy day.
we are moving so quickly right now. Yes. Okay, we will be in recess until we get those papers back
It
up
should be
here.
just 1 minute.
No
Thank you so
problem.
much for your patience. I'm always happy to help Mr. Hafen be on time.
And it looks like we have everything in the room now, so we will come back to order and we will continue on with the hearing for Senate Bill 177.
Thank you so much for your patience, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Chair Peters and members of the committee. I am Marilyn Dondero Loop, representing Senate District 8 in Clark County, and I'm pleased to come before you this afternoon to present Senate Bill 177. This bill codifies an existing requirement that Medicaid covers antipsychotic and anticonvulsant drugs under certain circumstances and extends the requirement to health maintenance organizations and managed care organizations. Additionally, this bill will authorize the Commissioner of Insurance to penalize those who do not comply. First, I will provide some brief background on mental health in the state. In Nevada, over 20% of adults report having a mental health disorder. And in almost 6% of adults, the disorder is so severe that it causes serious functional impairments in daily living activities and the overall quality of life. This bill intends to remove barriers associated with access to mental health and other health services by protecting those individuals that rely on antipsychotics and anticonvulsant drugs. Antipsychotic medications and any pharmaceutical agent used to control the symptoms of serious mental illness, such as those that occur with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and even some severe forms of anxiety and depression. Anticonvulsants are described as any drug used to reduce the frequency or the occurrence of epileptic seizures or to terminate an ongoing seizure. Though there are protections written into the Medicaid manual regarding anticonvulsants and antipsychotics, not having these protections codified in NRS leaves room for additional barriers to be put in place. For example, many other states require that more than one failure of a preferred prescription for their Medicaid patients before covering another one, leaving the individual to deal with withdrawal symptoms and other discomforts that come from gaps in treatment. Some states require the failure of 2 or 3, and this is not something that I want to see happen in Nevada. Section 1 of this bill codifies the existing requirement for Medicaid to provide the coverage of any typical or atypical antipsychotic medication or anticonvulsant medication that is not on the list of preferred prescription drugs upon the demonstrated therapeutic failure of one drug on that list to adequately treat the condition of a recipient of Medicaid. Section 2 of this bill clarifies that this requirement will apply to health maintenance organizations. Section 3 of this bill authorizes the Commissioner of Insurance to suspend or revoke the certificate of authority of an HMO who fails to comply with the requirement. And Section 4 of this bill clarifies the requirement of Section 1 that it will apply to managed care organizations. It is my pleasure to introduce somebody here at the table with me that I am grown very fond of, Abby Bernhardt. And Abby is the former Miss Lyon County, and she is the current Miss Nevada, Virginia City under the Miss America organization, and is a mental health advocate to create positive policy change. And I want you to hear her story and listen carefully, because this bill is about our constituents and our Nevada residents that we live next door to. And lastly, Robin Reedy will also join me at the table to ask some organizations. And Robin is the executive director of NAMI, Nevada, an organization of family, friends, and individuals whose lives have been impacted by mental health. So with that, if we could listen to Abby's story, and then we'll be ready for questions. Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Bernhardt. Please remember to state your name for the record when you speak. You may begin.
Hello, my name is Abby. I'm with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. At 3 years old, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I experienced rapid episodes with manic cycling. I had so much anxiety, sadness, and anger all at once. By middle school, the mania turned to depression, and I found myself in crisis. My doctor put me on medications hoping one would work. When it didn't, he added another. My anxiety and depression increased, and I suffered from hallucinations which I had never had before and have not had since. Perhaps one of the scariest memories is sleep paralysis. At this point, I was hospitalized and received a doctor, and he started decreasing all of the medications to start over. Now I experienced withdrawal symptoms from medications adding additional extreme symptoms. When I first became depressed, I could deal with the pain to a certain degree. Eventually, it became harder until I couldn't even get through the day. I started to disassociate. I became convinced life was not real. Maybe I was drowning or in a coma, dying. I couldn't see a way out of my pain, and I was beyond what I could handle. I felt the weight of the world, and loneliness and sadness consumed me. At 10 years old, I attempted suicide. There was no escape. Doctors fought Medicaid trying to manage my medications, but lacked control over what medications were approved due to the power insurance companies have over coverage. I know the importance of medication. It gave me back my life and a way to manage my mental health. If doctors were able to choose medications based on my need, I would have not have suffered so much trauma for so long. The memories of my suicide attempt left me with reoccurring nightmares where I would relive that horrible day and every detail that led me to that attempt. Now when I get depressed, I fear the nightmare I once lived. I stand with those who are struggling. There can be better days ahead. I support SB 177. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bernhardt, for sharing your story. Tragic and common, unfortunately. I believe Ms. Reedy, you are next. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robin Reedy. I'm the Executive Director of NAMI Nevada. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in Nevada. I represent both those living with a mental health condition and the families that love them. Medication and a change in medication is the most dangerous time for someone living with a mental health condition and their families. I have heard story upon story with tragic outcomes because of changes. But one story I'd like to tell you is much more personal to me. My granddaughter, when she was in a junior in high school, started suffering from depression, and it was serious. Her medications changed constantly, trying to figure out what would work for her, and dealing with the insurance companies saying no. NAMI believes that any medication choice should be between the patient and the doctor, period. My granddaughter eventually did not graduate high school. And as she turned 18, there were more medications, and we paid cash to get the right medication for her. So she's doing well now. But she lost 2 years. 2 years because insurance companies refused to give her the medication that her doctor thought would work for her. Complicated as well by the fact that she was under 18. Who here wants to give up 2 years of their life? Who here wants to see their children or grandchildren give up 2 years of their life? Please pass SB 177.
Thank you for sharing your stories today. Do you have any other
Madam Chair, Marilyn Dondero Loop, for the record. No, those are my presenters, so if you have questions, please go ahead.
Great. Well, I have folks let me know that they have questions. I want to ask real quick a clarifying on this bill. So the bill as written would affect only those who qualify for Medicaid. Is that correct, or does that?
Yes, only those that qualify for Medicaid.
And it's an existing internal policy so this would be codifying it, so it can't change through regulatory or policy changes.
Correct. Thank you very much. That's correct.
Okay. Assemblyman Gray, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's going to be one quick question followed by a little clarification, maybe. Madam, so just to be clear, to get this on the record, so this is not going to be their first line drug they'll go to. They will have to have tried other formulary drugs, and then those will have to be proven ineffective before they can go off formulary, correct? To be covered?
They will have to try one of the formulary drugs. And if that does not work, then they should be able to go with the drug of choice.
Okay, thank you. And one, I would like to, maybe if you could add a little clarification, any reason why Dr. Titus in the Senate was opposed? She was the only nay vote that I could find.
Marilyn Dondero Loop, for the record. I cannot speak for other senator or assembly people's votes. You would have to ask her personally.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for being here. I know we've been working with commercial insurance, Sometimes we have to fight to get the medication we need, and I personally was on hold for 8 hours fighting my insurance company for my son. So, and they weren't happy about that, but still. Anyways, the current list of drugs, how many are on there, roughly, if you have any idea? And how many instances does this happen? I mean, I would assume that it happens more frequently than what people really think does happen.
Marilyn Dondero Loop, for the record. I've even checked with my phone a friend, and none of us are clear on exactly how many, so I don't know that we can answer that question. We could maybe get you that answer, but I don't know that I know it.
It was more of a curiosity of how many were on there. But thanks.
I have Assemblywoman Taylor next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, and your presenters for bringing this really important issue. I had a similar. I actually had two questions. Now one because my colleague, Assemblywoman Gorlo, asked the first in terms of what kind of numbers, and so I understand you don't have that handy. So hopefully, whenever you get some info, you can share that. My other question would be though. Do you find, there may be trends, or are there other occurrences of other states that have put something like this where you have to try one of the formulary drugs or something along those lines, and then you can go to the drug that your doctor prescribed? Because it seems clearly it's important to go with what your doctor prescribed. So,
Marilyn Dondero Loop, for the record, Madam Chair, through you. Yes, there are other states. I will let Ms. Reedy answer that because I believe she probably knows other groups that have these types of bills, or phone a friend. Miss Jeanette Belts will come forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Jeanette Bells, working with NAMI Nevada. Thank you so much for that question. As Senator Dondero Loop mentioned in her testimony, there's a wide range across the country. One of the things that has made us a little concerned is that the state Medicaid program changed its PBM effective July 1 of 2022. There are some programs that PBM participates in nationally with other states. And so just not knowing what those trends might be, it seemed to make sense to codify in statute what the current policy was. However, having said that, what would be lovely if we could be here was to take that fail one away altogether, and certainly would love to be able to do that. That unfortunately would create a fiscal note because that is not current policy. So you weigh putting something in statute that's helpful versus something that would be really helpful, and opted not to do that because then there would be a fiscal note. So way back in the day when I was a junior lobbyist, that was the way it used to be for Medicaid. So there were no restrictions on atypical and typical antipsychotics and anticonvulsants at that time. And that was removed because of dollar considerations and savings to the state.
thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
This is a really important issue, especially as we're talking about destigmatizing and taking more seriously mental health and behavioral health issues. I encourage anybody who is interested in this topic to start diving in. There are several resources that we can get you if you are interested, but it is much more complex than just allowing patients and doctors to have their relationship, especially when it's state dollars that are involved. I have Assemblyman Ornlicker next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill. One question I have is, does this requirement of covering any alternatives after trying one on the formulary, does this get into the question of whether if there's a generic alternative to the brand name that's not on the formulary, does this say Medicaid can't require the generic, or would Medicaid still be able to require the generic version if they go to the off-list drug?
Marilyn Dondero Loop for the record, Madam Chair, through you. I do not believe that that's the case in this bill. And I don't believe Ms. Belts thinks there is either.
Madam Chair, through you to Assemblyman Orent-Licker. If you look at page 3, it says the Medicaid program, under sub 6, the Medicaid program must automatically cover any typical or atypical antipsychotic medication or anticonvulsant medication that is not on the list of preferred drugs upon the demonstration of the failure of one drug. So I believe that wouldn't create that restriction that you're referring to.
Okay, follow up, please. So would you want or be comfortable if we clarified that if there's a generic version, Medicaid can require the generic version, or would you have a problem with Medicaid saying, we'll let you have this medication, we just want you to have the generic version?
Ms. Bernhardt, yeah, I think that sometimes these personal stories and the impact that generics have had, especially on behavioral health drugs, can be helpful in understanding like the complexities. Please go ahead.
Abby Bernhardt for the record. I've been on these generics, and I know when I was on lithium, at least I think it was lithium. I've been on so many medications over the years. I believe that there has been some generics that I have been on that have not worked as successfully. They feel different in my symptoms, and they cause different things to happen. So I don't think generics work as effective always.
Can I clarify, Senator, did you work with Medicaid on this bill in the Senate?
I know I'm not the senator, Jeanette
No,
Bells.
that's okay. Thank you, Ms. Bells. Go ahead.
For the record, thank you very much for that question, Madam Chair. The real question was whether there was going to be a fiscal note on this or not. And since there was not a fiscal note and there was no testimony in opposition, to me, that means if there were issues, they would have been brought up. And also, if I could briefly address Assemblyman Orent-Licker's question, I think this is the bill in its purest form, and I wouldn't want to inadvertently misstep with an amendment that would be unintentional, I think, in nature. Thank you.
And Marilyn Dondero Loop for the record, Chair. I would also address Assemblyman Orent-Licker's question, and that is, I would never, with any bill, say yes without seeing language, because I think that's the most important part, because many times you can say yes and then you see the language and it's a no. So I always prefer to see language, but we have not heard from Medicaid. Nobody has opposed this bill, so.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up? All right. I have two more questions on my list. Please let me know if you have other questions. We'll start with Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for bringing this bill, Senator. My question, though, is why the selection of the antipsychotic and anticonvulsant drugs versus, and this seems like in the treatment of mental health, certainly antidepressants, and there are other medications that patients need to try out sometimes, and sometimes another one works better for them. So I'm wondering if there was a particular issue with these categories of drugs versus other medications to treat mental health.
Thank you very much for that question, Madam Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Newby. This is Jeanette
Please feel
Bells.
free to go directly. I apologize. Please feel free to go directly to members.
Thank you. This is Jeanette Bells for the record. Yeah, that would be the creation of the fiscal note, because this codifies the current Medicaid policy of one fail for these particular drugs. And as I mentioned earlier, long time ago, those drugs had open access. Those particular drugs, atypical and typical antipsychotics and anticonvulsants. And so it's been kind of underlying in the policy for a long time because those were open access and then they were restricted. So this codifies that current policy just respective to those drugs. It would be lovely to open it up.
Thank you. On the last question on my list is from Assemblyman Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for this bill. I think also thank you, Ms. Bernhardt, for your testimony. It was really moving, and I appreciate you sharing your story. It's always hard to hear it, as well as also you talking about it. So thank you for sharing. My question in terms of this bill, not necessarily, maybe this answer would be the phone a friend answer. I'm just trying to thinking from a process where we put these laws in and are Nevadans still having challenges in getting the medication. Maybe the process already exists, but where do we, referring back to my colleague Assemblywoman Gorlow, having to spend 8 hours on the phone, if this law were to pass and we need to implement this, if patient and Nevadan has issues with folks not complying, like these MCOs or HMOs, where does the patient or Nevadans call for and hopefully not to have an 8-hour experience getting on being on hold and trying to figure out where the help is, even if there are laws in place?
Thank you very much for that question, Assemblyman Nguyen. Jeanette Bells for the record. So specifically, this only applies to Medicaid. So it would be the process that Medicaid has in place if they have an issue with the implementation. I can tell you that Medicaid is very good at notifying providers. They have, I believe, what they're called bulletins, and so they notify the providers of changes, and their PBM does as well, specific to, there's lots of changes that happen, not just related to drugs, but that their PBM notifies providers relative to this. So I believe that their system is very good about that, and it would only apply to Medicaid, so it would not apply to a commercial insurer. It doesn't apply to PEV. It doesn't apply to others. The self-insureds, it doesn't apply to any of those. So it would be whatever policy that Medicaid has in place in order for there to be challenges to, how they're getting their drug.
Quick follow-up, Chair. Thank you. So I think my line of question was just making sure that the community that I represent, mostly language access issues, having the inability to navigate this process, right? And this is a good intention where we can have more resources that are available, because, the mental health issues in the Asian community, especially, with coming out of COVID, it has a lot more risen. Well, geez, I need more caffeine. Definitely, there's a lot more out there that needs this types of resources, and I think I'd be glad to know in terms of processes that exist so that the language access communities who trying to navigate this, and I know Medicaid is great, but in terms of data with folks accessing these resources, that maybe we can do some sort of awareness for the language access communities.
Marilyn Dondero, for the record, thank you very much. That's a good reminder that we need to do those things. Hopefully, when this information goes out after the bill is passed, that we have doctors that are aware, and other health professionals that can assist, and all of us, right? Our constituents contact us, and NAMI and other mental health organizations, of which we have many. Hopefully, they'll all have that information for our fellow colleagues and constituents as well. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and to that point, I believe that there is a cultural competency bill floating around the building that addresses some of those physician concerns for ensuring that there's that communication and cultural competency work being done on the physician side at least. And the state has robust policies on language access in certain areas, and I'm sure Medicaid does as well. However, we do not have anyone from Medicaid in the audience today, so we might need we could probably follow up with them if you have additional questions on Medicaid's policies around language access. Are there any other questions from the committee? I think one of the most important issues that you guys didn't touch on, but I think is worth putting on the record, is just the economic impact of reducing the burden and barrier access for these kinds of drugs and prescriptions for folks, especially those who are eligible for Medicaid, because they are struggling to get on their feet. And the point of Medicaid, right, in these social service structures is to help folks get back on their own feet, figure out how to support their families, figure out how to get access to the things they need to continue without those supports in some cases. So that economic burden of spending 2 years of your life struggling to find what makes you function properly or in a way that adds to your quality of life, that's a huge economic burden for these folks. So I really appreciate that this bill is not just a healthcare bill. It's really about the economics and the burden of our system on folks. Seeing no other questions, we will go ahead and move into testimony. We will start with support testimony in our physical locations here in Carson City and Las Vegas, and then move to the phones. If there are folks who would like to provide support testimony on Senate Bill 177, please come up to the desk. I would ask that when you're done with your testimony, you step away so we can keep filling the seats in as we go. Remember to state your name for the record. You may begin when you're ready.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Nielsen, and I'm actually going to make some quick comments as a constituent today. I wasn't prepared to do comments, but it's pretty personal. Both my husband and I have pretty severe epilepsy. We both spent several years in trial and error, desperate to find medications that work for us. Seizure medication can provide control of seizures in 7 out of 10 people. And I repeat, we spent several years, both of us did, trying to find a medication that works for us. And only I was able to find that after 12 medication trials. My husband had a quarter of his brain removed to get seizure control. So it's a pretty big deal. Medicaid does not know more than the doctors that work directly with these patients. And the goal is to give back life to the individuals who have such a significant life-changing diagnosis. I urge you to listen to the patients that have gone through this and the family members that have supported people with epilepsy or mental health conditions. All we want is access to the medication that allows us to live our lives. Thank you.
Hello, Chair and Committee. Elise Monroy, Bell's Case Government Affairs. I'm here today on behalf of the Nevada Psychiatric Association. As testified today, when patients have to go through those changes in medications, it's an incredibly volatile time. So ensuring that providers are able to get their patients to the right medicine as quickly as possible is incredibly important. But what that also does is help to improve the patient's it increases the opportunity for a better health outcome. And frankly, that's the most important thing, is the better health outcome. But we have had today to talk a lot about the money part of this, and better health outcomes for patients on Medicaid means less spend for Medicaid. So that is a good thing all around. And also, to the chair's last comment before we open to support, I'll just remind people that the committee today, that healthy people sustain a strong workforce, and a strong workforce will sustain a strong economy. So we urge your support of this bill today. Thank you.
Barry Cole, Barry Cole. I'm a member of the Nevada Psychiatric Association, so I'm glad my organization is in support. I want to testify as an actual psychiatrist, though, because I have a slightly different view of how this all really happens. You know, 20 to 30 years ago, if you had asked me, how do I pick the next medicine for the next patient, it would have been a lot of verbiage that would come down to what's been abbreviated as SWAG, swag. And if you know what that means, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Today, it's precision. We talk about the diagnosis. We talk about what neurotransmitters we might want to modulate. We look at side effect profiles. We even ask about cost, if you can believe it. I want to know, how will you pay for the medicine? That changes what I'm prescribing. Each clinical trial works out to be 1 to 3 months. It takes me about a month to titrate up the medicine, at least a month to observe it, and if it's a failure, a month to take somebody off before I can start the next medicine. Now, herein lies the rub, that we know that if you look at first episode psychosis, each redundant psychotic break reduces the recovery rate by 10%. You have 10 psychotic breaks, you may become permanently psychotic. So we're trying to prevent permanency, we're trying to prevent what are called neuroplastic changes and get to the right medicines sooner rather than later. Question was asked about generics versus brand. There's an interesting gimmick to this. The FDA will acknowledge that both have the same chemical compound, but what you don't necessarily know is that a generic is allowed to have a wider range of standardization. Might only be 70% of the reference drug, might be 115%. You move people from one generic to another, you actually could have a 45% variance. That's why some endocrinologists say, my patients cannot take levothyroxine, they must take Synthroid. Many epileptologists will say, my patients cannot take generic phenytoin, they must take brand name Dilantin, because they want consistency. So if I measure a blood level and I make a dose adjustment, I can rely on that. If I'm bouncing around from generic to generic, I don't know what I'm dealing with. And then finally, from my perspective, we now have precision medications in terms of the antipsychotics where we can give them in 1, 2, 3, and 6-month injections. That's a tremendous improvement. Patient compliance is virtually 100% if they showed up for the once every unit of time injection. And we're trying to move more people in that way. The problem is a month of that medicine is $1,450 potentially. Start doing the math, you're talking about many thousands of dollars for 3 to 6 months. But then look at the price of a psychiatric hospitalization. These are not cheap. $1,000, $2,000 a day to be on an inpatient unit. So I really want to encourage you to look at this SB 177 as getting people to the right meds at the right time, and that the cost savings will come from what we don't do, which hopefully won't be to unnecessarily have to hospitalize people because they didn't successfully respond while they were still outpatients. They weren't getting progressively more refractory to treatment. They're staying available to us. Thanks.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Alex Tanchek with Silver State Government Relations, representing the Nevada Advanced Practice Registered Nurse Association, here in support of the bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Watkins, and I represent the Nevada State Medical Association. We are in support of SB 177 as it ensures continuity between the patient and the physician, and thank you to the bill sponsor for bringing this.
Thank you. Seeing an empty desk, both Carson and Las Vegas, I'd ask BPS to go to the phones for support testimony on SB 177.
To testify in support of Senate Bill 177, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last digit 653, you are unmuted and may begin.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead. Remember to state your name for the record.
Of course. I'm sorry, I was talking to myself and I didn't know if I'm not muted. Good afternoon, Chair. This is Dora Martinez, representing the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I wasn't prepared to really do testimony, but I heard one of my favorite senators' voice, so I had to get on, and I listened to the rest of the testimonies, and I did a quick research, and I really love this bill. People with disability are always, they fall into this category most of the time, and we always sometimes have a hard time fighting and going against the big guy. So we appreciate Senator Dandero Loop. Thank you so much. We like this bill and we support this bill. And thank you, Madam Chair, for everything. Take care.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Next call, please.
Chair, there are no callers to testify in support at this time.
Thank you so much. We'll move into opposition testimony then in our physical locations and then move to the phones. Is there anyone in Carson City or Las Vegas who'd like to provide opposition testimony on Senate Bill 177? Seeing no one approaching the desks, I would ask BPS to check the phone lines for opposition testimony on Senate Bill 177.
To testify in opposition to Senate Bill 177, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers to testify in opposition at this time.
Thank you so much. We will go ahead and move into neutral testimony. Is there anyone in Carson City or Las Vegas that would like to provide neutral testimony on Senate Bill 177? Seeing no one come up to the desks in our physical locations, we'll move on to the phones. BPS, is there anyone on the phone line for neutral testimony on Senate Bill 177?
To testify in neutral for Senate Bill 177, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much. I would ask the bill sponsor, do you have closing remarks? We're going to, thank you so much, waive closing remarks today. That will close out the hearing on Senate Bill 177, and we will go ahead and move on to Senate Bill 286. This bill revises provisions relating to health care. Very specific. Welcome again, Senator. Please remember to state your names for the record. You may go directly to members when we have questions, and you may begin when you're ready.
You know, Madam Chair, I always like to keep people guessing. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Marilyn Dondero Loop, representing Senate District 8 in Clark County, and I am pleased to present Senate Bill 286 on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. This measure seeks to bring more awareness to multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis, or MS, is defined by Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine as a long-lasting disease of the nervous system, an autoimmune disorder, if you will, that causes the body to attack itself. Damaging the nerves, this condition disrupts the essential communication between the brain and the body. Affecting everyone in different ways, symptoms can range from blurred vision to losing the ability to communicate completely, and in severe cases, complete paralysis. The Cleveland Clinic of Nevada, the only national multiple sclerosis designated partner in Southern Nevada, asserts that there are approximately 2,500 Nevadans that suffer from this condition. As many of us know, there are challenges with diagnosing this illness for multiple reasons, such as the vagueness of symptoms and the lack of a specific test used to identify the disease. Despite these challenges, it is proven that the early diagnosis yields better results and reduced disability since it allows for early intervention. MS is diagnosed through a ruling out process in which two things must be true in order to have that disease. For an MS diagnosis, you must have two attacks at least 1 month apart and have more than one area of damage to the central nervous system myelin, which is a coating or layering of the nerve. This damage is often identified using an MRI or neurological exam. Current research shows the sooner you can obtain an MS diagnosis, the sooner you can start therapy to reduce its effects. Disease-modifying therapies, or DMTs, are used to reduce the severity and the number of attacks one experiences, and DMTs are also have been shown to be effective in reducing long-term disability. David Humm, known as one of the original Las Vegas Raiders, received a diagnosis after retiring from the National Football League. When considering treatment options in response, he opted out of receiving DMTs. That was until he noticed his sister Lori, who was also diagnosed with MS. Her treatment experience was different as she elected to receive the DMTs and responded well to treatment. Unfortunately, David lost his battle to MS in 2018. If there was more information disseminated about MS, he could have been more aware of the benefits of DMTs long before Lori's diagnosis. I went to school with David, not at the same high school, but we were in high school at the same time, along with his family and my siblings, and as well as a well-known lobbyist. Helen Foley was there as well. And you might have heard me say on the floor at one time that Lisa Foster, our friend and longtime lobbyist here in the building for the last 20 years, was diagnosed as well. And if she would have been told 20 years ago into this disease, then her delayed treatment and subsequently resulting in her now using a cane and a walker. And that's why we haven't seen Lisa in this building this year. Bringing more awareness and increasing access to information on MS could ultimately save lives of many Nevadans, and for this reason, I chose to sponsor this bill. I'm going to speak briefly to the sections of bills, and then I'm going to hand it off to my co-presenters. Section 1 of this bill amends existing law and requires the Division of Public and Behavioral Health of the Department of Health and Human Services to maintain a website that provides information relating to MS and the resources available to those who are diagnosed. In Section 2, the governor must annually proclaim the third week of March to be Multiple Sclerosis Week, calling upon the media, educators, healthcare professionals, among others, to bring MS to the attention of Nevadans. And I know that I think all of you received an MS pin and a bracelet at the end of March. I would like to introduce Jimmy Hum. I call him Jimmy. Some of you may call him Mr. Hum. He's the nephew of Dave Hum, and he's really been a wonderful help to me telling this story. And then I also have Reagan Comas with me today, representing the Cleveland Clinic with some statistics on the disease. So, Madam Chair, with your permission, I'd like to turn it over to Jimmy to start with and tell his story of his Uncle David.
Hi, thank you. Please remember to state your name.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Peters and members of the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services. For the record, my name is James Hum. Normally, I'm here in these committees on behalf of GOED, but today I'm here as a private citizen to assist Senator Dondero Loop with her presentation, as this bill does mean a great deal to my family. Unfortunately, MS has been a big part of our lives. In many cases, it has revolved around it. As I sit here and reflect, there honestly isn't a day I can remember that it didn't impact the lives of myself and my family. I still recall seeing my cousin Courtney, when she was only 10 years old, pushing her dad in his wheelchair. Watching such a young person learn how to push and collapse a wheelchair and lift it unassisted in the back of a car was truly a sight to see. Let me quickly point out, though, that I did assist her when I did see this. So my Aunt Lori, who, as Senator Dondero Loop just said, many people didn't know she also was afflicted with the disease and at way too young of an age. She had to navigate the raising of children while her body slowly betrayed her. Oftentimes, attending their school and sporting events and trying to tackle the bleachers with the use of a cane was no easy task. She continues to this day to fight this disease. And although Uncle David lost his battle, there are many others out there like Lori that continue their fight and struggle with what would seem to most of us in this room to be mundane tasks. I would like to transition, though, since as I've outlined these struggles, please know we've had several uplifting and incredibly positive experiences too. My uncle has received many acknowledgments and accolades during his battle, and denoting his battle, my aunt has gotten help, care, and medicine that she's needed. We've met incredible people like Dr. Hua at the Ruvo Center for Brain Health and Reagan Comas, who you will hear from shortly, who advocate on their behalf. They are doing truly terrific work. And of course, there's Senator Dondero Loop, who was kind enough to bring this bill forward. We are honored to be here today at her request, as the action she's taking will help raise awareness and lead to a path to something more. Ideally, to educate and raise awareness on early detection, to provide the proper diagnoses, treatment, and long-term care for those who need it, and to aid professionals in their continued research needed to battle this silent killer. So I ask this committee today, without delay, please consider passing SB 286 as the first step on our journey to working together on these issues to raise awareness, prolong lives, and ultimately beat this disease, since as Dr. Hua told us when we met with our time equals brain. Humbly thank you for your support and consideration of this bill.
Thank you, Chair Peters and members of the committee. My name is Reagan Comas with R&R Partners, and I'm here today representing the Cleveland Clinic Lou Rubo Center for Brain Health. It is estimated that nearly 1 million people are living with multiple sclerosis in the United States. Multiple sclerosis is sometimes referred to as the invisible disease because many people living with MS do not outwardly exhibit symptoms. This can create a unique set of issues, and some people assume that patients don't really have the disease. People with invisible symptoms must constantly adjust to the difference between how they feel on the inside and how the world reacts to them since they don't look sick. This can cause self-doubt or discourage some from seeking treatment. Yet we know the earlier you can obtain proper diagnosis and start the appropriate therapy, this can reduce the risk of future disability. While MS cannot be cured, it can be treated. One of the keys to early diagnosis is being aware of the early signs and symptoms of the disease. The onset of MS often occurs between the ages of 20 and 40 years old. Warning signs include blurred vision, difficulty walking, numbness and tingling in different parts of your body, weakness and fatigue, balance issues, problems controlling bladder, cognitive impairment, muscle stiffness, and spasms. The Mellon program at the Lou Rubo Center for Brain Health is the only comprehensive MS center in Nevada. We are currently serving around 2,000 lives, and we see over 3,500 MS patients a year. We have conducted 26 clinical trials and tested 5 newly FDA-approved drugs. Yet we continue to return to early detection and diagnosis provides the best outcome for our patients. That is why we are here in strong support of SB 286 to increase awareness around multiple sclerosis, provide tools for families to find assistance and the support that they need, and to emphasize the importance of seeing a doctor if you or a loved one exhibit the signs and symptoms of the disease. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are we ready for questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, and I'll probably have to phone my friends again, so please go ahead.
Thank you. I am going to start with Assemblyman Nguyen. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you, Senator, for being here and the co-presenter as well. I know this is going to be broken record for me, and this is something that I said in the last bill, and I just want to make sure that I put this out there on public record that as we are going to look at different bills in this session around the issue of language access and cultural competencies, and always looking at things to modernize how we govern in our state, as well as the agencies and the services that are available, that if we're going to take this step to the next step on the technological things with websites, that if we could look at opportunity to translate these information on that website. Most of the time, it's such a easy thing just to add a button that says, hey, you know, if you speak this language, click here, and then it will convert that text into that language that the user is familiar with, especially with something as complicated as MS and having the ability to learn, especially the not just the district that I represent, but we have the fastest growing language community in Nevada right here, and we want to be sure that these informations are being thought of right away, and maybe you already have that in mind already, but I would just love to see that as we have these awareness week, that we can reach out to the folks who truly need it because of language access. So just want to put that out there. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Marilyn Dondero Loop for the record, duly noted, and we'll make that suggestion.
And I hope that the folks who represent Google and Microsoft are listening, because I believe they have translation software out there, and maybe they're just not marketing it in the right place. Are there other questions from the committee? Yes, Assemblywoman Taylor, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator. Again, thank you, and to the co-presenters, thank you. This is just maybe an anecdotal question. My colleague's question, Assemblyman Nguyen, made me think of this. The numbers Ms. Comas, that you share in terms of the number of Americans that are impacted by this disease. I mean, I had no idea it was that large of a number. I mean, anybody impacted by it, it doesn't matter if it's small or large, but that large of a number. Do we have any information at all around a couple of things? How many in Nevada may suffer from MS, and do we have any indication at all if demographically, sometimes some diseases impact one group more than another, or one gender more than another? That information, I think, would also be helpful from a website standpoint, if there's anything like that. So I just wanted to put that out there and see if you have anything you might be able to share.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Taylor. Reagan Comas for the record. The exact number of Nevada citizens that have MS, it's hard for us to state exactly. I know that we guess that there's around 2,500 in southern Nevada. I don't have the data for northern Nevada. And as far as the demographics, I don't have the information in front of me, but that's certainly something that I can reach out to my folks at the Cleveland Clinic and get that information back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also think, that information, I think, on the website would be helpful, knowledgeable for us. And then if there's anything with any kind of markers or indication from demographically, I think that'd be helpful as well.
And Marilyn Dondero, for the record, not demographics, but Ms. Lisa Foster believes she probably had the disease for 20 years before they actually diagnosed it, and she had the MRI. And David Hum's situation was a little bit different, but still, that early diagnosis is the one thing that is constant, that is important. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill. I had the great pleasure of growing up right next door to David Hum, and from when I was a little girl and saw him as this just huge, very athletic man, to seeing, over my lifetime his decline, it was really something, and so I'm glad that you're bringing this. My question is, with this website, I would hope that just in the implementation of it, that we also provide that information to doctors, because I imagine when someone gets a diagnosis, it's got to be a little bit of a relief to know what's going on, but also really scary to understand that you've just stepped into this world. And so I would just encourage that outreach to make sure that, when a patient gets that diagnosis, that they are provided that information. Dr. Google can be a pretty scary place, so it's always nice to try and push people towards verified information. Thank you.
Any other questions? Assemblyman Gray, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick thing. If you guys can add, many more, as many resources on there as you can, like, trial studies that may be going on for people to reach out to. This affects our family pretty intimately. My wife's twin sister, right in that 20 to 40 age group, she was working full-time, literally 1 week as an EMS dispatcher, or a county sheriff's dispatcher. Started with diplopia. 6 weeks later, it had hit her so bad in that 6 weeks, she was bedridden, and they were saying, hey, we're going to, we don't know what's going on. They wound up having to do a brain biopsy, and they weren't doing DMTs yet then, but they were doing Captioning was in its trial phase, and they had used, Captioning interferon, and it did wonders. She's got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old now and living a somewhat normal life, but one of the things that really were lacking were the community resources or the availability to find out the resources that are out there to help them and help them cope with it. Because, it caused marriage problems. It caused all kinds of things that, are not, they're directly related to the disease, but not of a, physical nature, so.
Marilyn Dondero, for the record, thank you for that suggestion, and we actually all three agree, I know, and one of the things that we are so fortunate about in this state, while it is in the southern part of this state, the Cleveland Clinic is a gift, and it is really a blessing for them to be in our state, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move into testimony. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and start with support testimony in our physical locations and then move to the phones. If you are here in support, please come up to the table. And same as before, we ask that when you're done with your testimony, you step away so we can keep those seats filled as we go. Please remember to state your name for the record. You may begin when you're ready.
Hello, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Nielsen, and again, many of you know me in my professional role, but I'm speaking today as a constituent only. I was 27 when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Before my diagnosis, I knew of the disease because of my aunt Renee Florence was diagnosed as a young child. She's now completely bedbound and depends on others to help her assist with every aspect of her life. My aunt was part of the first round of testing of DMT drugs, and because of people like her, treatments are available and available much sooner. I received my diagnosis and treatment at the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health, and I applaud their hard work alongside the senator. Because of them, I'm hopeful that I will watch my 3 daughters walk down the aisle, and I plan to stand up on my own next to my husband when they ask who is giving them away. It's vital that this bill passes to allow for earlier access to information and hopefully prolong the life and livelihood of those who receive this devastating diagnosis. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story. Please remember to state your name. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chairwoman and committee, my name is Lynn Chapman, and I'm representing myself today. I have my husband's niece was diagnosed back in 1989. She was 21 years old, and she had just had a baby, and she was diagnosed with MS. And we were all shocked, how could this possibly happen? But did we know anything about MS? We'd heard the name, but we really didn't understand what that meant. Along came a friend of mine, I've known her for about 32 years, Kathy. And when I first met her at church, she was using a cane, then she was using a walker shortly thereafter, and the next thing you know, she's in a wheelchair. She had MS, and it was one of those things where she almost passed away. She was bedridden, it was terrible. But with the newer drugs and this and that, she is now, you would never know it, she walks fine, she's in really good health, you think. You would never know that she had MS. I think having, people know what MS is as far as, well, it's something that's bad and you can end up in a wheelchair. And that's what most people know about MS. I think it would be nice to have an awareness week, and a lot more than that, because I think people don't realize how devastating this can be. And but we need to know about resources, we need to know about information and the newest meds that are available, and about the clinic in Southern Nevada. I think that's important. So I think this is a good bill, and please pass it. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tom Dunn, and I'm today testifying as a private citizen. I have a family member who has been surviving with MS for over 20 years now, and had to retire early as a public school teacher due to her challenges with MS. And I also have a coworker who ultimately retired early from being a firefighter so that they could spend the best years of their remaining life with their small children at home. So as a private citizen with family members and coworkers that have been surviving with MS, I highly encourage you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Barry Cole, B-A-R-Y-C-O-L-E. Some of you may remember I actually was both a neurologist and a psychiatrist. So back in the 80s, I've been a lot of things. You've probably figured that out by now. But back in the 80s, the way we treated MS was with something called ACTH, which was a way to stimulate the adrenal glands to sort of just give a generic immune suppression. Now we've moved on to these disease-modifying agents. It's become very precise, like everything we talk about. It is a godsend that we have the Lou Ruvo Center in Las Vegas. Dylan Wint is the medical director, and I'm not saying his name correctly. He doesn't like to be called Dylan, but like Dylan or something. But he is a neurologist, psychiatrist as well, showing you that there are people crazy enough to do 2 residencies. One thing about MS that I think always is misunderstood is it is not muscular dystrophy. So there's MS versus MD. MD were Jerry's kids, the little boys that were usually in crutches and braces. MS starts, for most of the patients I've ever seen, late teens, 20s, and it becomes a progressively more devastating disease. You lose vision, maybe that's the first thing you know. You have what was originally called tic-douloureux, painful tic, now it's called trigeminal neuralgia, and God help you if you have it on both sides, that is the diagnosis of MS, even before we had things like MRI and lumbar puncture. With MRI, we can really be able to detect this disease very early, and time is money in this condition. We really want to get to it. I want to remind you that Nevada is a long state, and there is an MS zone that's always been talked about that starts at 40 degrees north and goes north. Well, Elko's 40.8. Winnemucca is 41 north. Reno is 39.5. Las Vegas is 36.1. So we live in a state where we should expect to see MS. If you come from a place, and I'm going to throw out a name, not for any particular reason, it's called Ho Chi Minh City. It used to be called Saigon. It's only at 11 degrees north. You would virtually not expect to see MS in Vietnam. But it's fascinating that as you go around the world and you go far north or far south, you begin to run into MS. So this is probably an autoimmune disease that we've heard about. People have speculated about potential viruses that might be responsible. Disease-modifying treatment saves lives, and I mean that literally. I have only once been told as a neurology resident that I effectively saved a human life, and it was because I started the treatment for MS at a very critical point in time in this person's life. So I want to say that we can do very well, and anything that brings attention to this disease and what it will mean for people's lives, we need to get this out sooner rather than later. I would even hope it comes up in a high school health class. That's how basic to me it should be.
Thank you for your testimony. Seeing no one else coming to the table in support in the Carson City or Las Vegas, BPS, is there anyone on the public line to provide support testimony on SB 286 today?
To testify in support of Senate Bill 286, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and the committee. It's Dora again, not Dora again Martinez. It's Dora Martinez, representing the Disability Peer Action Coalition. This is a very great bill. I ditto the people that went before me, and thank you to the sponsor. Take care.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Is there anyone else on the line for support testimony?
Chair, there are no other callers to testify at this time.
Thank you. We'll move into opposition testimony in our physical locations. Is there anyone in Carson City or Las Vegas who'd like to provide opposition testimony on Senate Bill 286? Seeing no one approach the desks, BPS, is there anyone on the public line for opposition testimony on Senate Bill 286?
To testify in opposition to Senate Bill 286, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers to testify in opposition at this time.
Thank you. We'll move into neutral testimony. Is there anyone in the Carson City or Las Vegas locations to provide neutral testimony today? Seeing none, we'll go to the phones. BPS, is there anyone on the public line to provide neutral testimony on Senate Bill 286?
To testify in neutral for Senate Bill 286, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much. I would invite the senator for closing remarks if you have any.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank your committee for your indulgence today with two bills. And thank you for all your good questions and suggestions, and I urge your support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentations today. With that, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 286. And we have our last bill, Senate Bill 109. I know the senator is on her way, and we have Mr. Musgrove here as well as co-presenter. And it looks like there are probably folks in Las Vegas as well. We'll take a brief recess real quick while the senator gets herself to the room and situated, and then we will begin. Welcome, Senator. We took a brief recess and everyone escaped for bio break maybe, but hopefully everyone will come back in here shortly. All right, I think we are only missing one person now, and hopefully they make their way back in. So we will come back to, oh, just kidding. You're here.
He was just threatening me over at the coffee station.
No. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and open the hearing on Senate Bill 109, which the internet is failing me for a minute. Revises provisions governing anatomical gifts. Welcome, Senator. It's great to have you back in our committee today. Please remember to state your name before you proceed.
Hello, my name is Rochelle Wynn, and I proudly represent Senate District 3 in southern Nevada, mostly in Clark County, Las Vegas, central Las Vegas area. I am very excited to be here this afternoon to present in front of my old committee, which is under wonderful new management, new and improved, I'm sure. And I am honored to present Senate Bill 109 today. It's official. In 2022, the U.S. reached 1 million organ transplants, more than any other country. Together, the organ donation and transplant community has made life-saving history. But it is only the beginning. With more than 105,000 people on the waiting list in the U.S. for life-saving transplants, over 600 Nevadans waiting, we are working to reach the next 1 million even sooner. Critically ill patients needing organs must face the financial, physical, and emotional burdens of awaiting a life-saving organ transplant, and for Nevadans, that most likely means traveling to neighboring states to get the care they need. Despite the continuing efforts at public education, misconceptions and inaccuracies about donations still persist today, and many of the opponents of Senate Bill 109 may in fact be helping propagate some of those myths even today, and we've seen that happen even on the Senate floor during the passage of this bill from that House. While specific beliefs differ, all major religions in the United States support or even encourage donation as a person's final act of love and charity in this world. If you are sick or injured and admitted to the hospital, the number one priority is always to save your life. You will have heard sitting in this committee that that is the primary mission, goal, accomplishment, creed, whatever it is of our hospital and medical professionals, that their goal is to save lives. And that is their first goal in this. Organ donation can only be considered after death has been declared by a physician. And Senate Bill 109 simply does not change that. And in fact, it does what several other states like Arizona, California, Florida, and Michigan have already done. And the reason that I point out those particular states is they have different geographical regions, they have different political heads of states, they have different political makeups, but they all have come together to enact similar legislation. And what Senate Bill 109 simply does is it gives coroners, medical examiners, and the court the ability to make decisions to save a life through donation if there is no one to speak on behalf of the deceased, or we have no indication what their last wishes might have been. We would hope that this final act of love and charity could be codified and enhanced by Senate Bill 109. There's a couple of things that I am going to actually have my colleague here, Dan Musgrove, from the on behalf of the Nevada Donor Network, and as part of the PowerPoint that's here presented. And I will tell you, it is only 4 pages, and most of it is one of the pages is this intro. So I'm going to turn it over to him, if that's fine, Chair, for him to go over some of that part of the presentation as well.
We started an hour early today just for this presentation, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Musgrove with Strategies 360 here on behalf, very proudly, of Nevada Donor Network. They say that any publicity is good publicity, and unfortunately, today or last couple weeks ago when this reached the Senate floor, that was not true. This was the headline on Channel 8 down in Vegas, saying that organ harvesting could expand in Nevada as we advance SB 109. And let me tell you, with complete and adamant certainty, this does not provide our blanket authority to procure organs, okay? This is what was said on the Senate floor by our esteemed colleague, Dr. Senator Titus. It sets a bad precedent. It focuses on people who tend to be homeless or foreign-born with no ID and cannot determine their true wishes. And again, we truly believe that SB 1 actually tightens up the Anatomical Gift Act. That is a uniform law that just about every state has adopted, and as Senator Wynn talked about, a number of states have gone a little bit further to make sure that it is even more clear. And this is a very specific set of circumstances that we are trying to address in SB 109. And I want to call attention to this page and the fact that the Nevada Hispanic Legislative Caucus and the Latin Chamber of Commerce supports 109 due to the fact that there's some misconception out there. They certainly wanted to make sure that that was not felt by this committee. And again, as I said, it provides a shift in current law, and it certainly tightens. It does not put forth a shift in current law. So current law allows for, and this will kind of get into the meat of the bill, but current law allows for about 9 categories of either relatives or caregivers who have the ability to make the determination if their loved one or the person that they're taking care of has deceased and has not made an affirmation, a clear and present affirmation that they want to either be an organ donor or they do not want to be an organ donor. And so when that very small situation occurs, and we have done research, and it really has only happened about once a year here in Nevada, where we have not been able to find the next of kin, we haven't been able to determine whether they marked their license or told a friend that they just can't be an organ donor or they want to be an organ donor. And so this gives us a very narrow ability in the case of brain death, and these are occurrences that happen in the hospital only. That's the only time we ever transplant an organ is someone that's already in a hospital. As the Senator Wynn has said, we've done everything that we can to try to save their life. So if in the case of brain death, that's when the coroner or medical examiner could be that neutral party who says, yes, if you are plan to take, and if this person is a good candidate, and we've done kind of again, we haven't done anything invasive. All we've done is looked at their medical records. We, being the organ procurement organization, thinks that this person who is deceased or about to die is a viable candidate for life-saving transplant. It is at that time that we go to either the coroner medical examiner, or if someone is on life support, we could go to the court and ask them to give us the permission to procure, not harvest, procure an organ for a life-saving transplant. And so we believe that SB 109 actually makes the law tighter. It actually removes one of the provisions that's already in law that says any other person having the authority to dispose of the deceased's body. We thought that was very vague and thought it ought to be stricken and gives us a little bit more authority to go through a process. And so why is it important? I think Senator Wynn talked about it, but 17 people each day die awaiting a transplant. Every 10 minutes, another person is added to the transplant list. Over 104,000 are waiting right now, 600 Nevadans who are your friends, and I think you're going to hear from a friend who got the call, a friend of a lot of people on this committee. It's your neighbors, it's your constituents. And if you have the ability to save a life, would it not be worth going through this process to perhaps get 1 or perhaps 1 to 7 to 8 organs that could change people's lives forever? And that's what SB 109 does. The actual bill, we've worked very closely with the coroner medical examiner, both in Washoe and Clark, to make sure that the provisions gave them the comfort that the due diligence was done. And when I finish up, I'm going to ask both Jackie Warren for Nevada Donor Network to speak, but I also have Dr. Laura Knight, who is the Washoe County Coroner Medical Examiner, on Zoom, so that she can talk about what kind of a process they go through to ensure that due diligence is done. But the bill provides for a framework for us to go through that process, both with the coroner medical examiner and district court. We worked with both of them and amended the bill to a degree on the Senate side, and we certainly hope that this is a bipartisan supported bill on this side of the House, and so much appreciate your time and attention today. If I can, Madam Chair, I'd open it up to Jackie Warren down in Vegas and Dr. Knight in Washoe County.
Ms. Warren, We welcome. Please, yes, please remember to state your name for the record. You may begin.
Sure. My name is Jackie Warren, and I first would like to say good afternoon to you, Chair Peters, and the Assembly Committee members. As stated, my name is Jackie Warren, and I am the Chief Quality Officer for Nevada Donor Network. And I am so appreciative of Senator Wynn's commitment to organ donation and having the opportunity to work with her through this very important piece of legislation. So, as Senator Wynn has stated in her earlier remarks, we believe this bill puts better protection into law specifically for NRS 451 and the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, which prescribes who has the authority to allow the life-saving gift of life through organ donation. Nevada Donor Network is one of 56 federally certified organ procurement organizations by the Centers of Medicaid and Medicare Services, or better known as CMS. Founded in 1987, Nevada Donor Network's core purpose is to save and heal lives to more than 3 million people in the state of Nevada and the thousands of potential transplant recipients. Our primary functions as an organ procurement organization are to coordinate, recover, and allocate these life-saving organs and healing tissues for transplantation and research on behalf of Nevada's heroic donors. So as stated in Chapter 451.66 of Nevada State Statute on Donation, documents that an anatomical gift of a decedent's body or part for the purpose of transplantation, therapy, research, or education for organ, eye, and tissue donation may be made by any member of the stated classes or persons. SB 109 further supports decision-making for donation for transplantation when there is no known person able to make this decision and there is no evidence that the decedent has communicated their desire to not donate their anatomical gifts. In these circumstances, this bill is proposing the ability for the coroner and/or medical examiner to provide such authorization. Should the decedent not fall under the jurisdiction of either, the case will elevate to the court system for a decision to be made. So SB 109 will make more organs available for recipients, shorten the wait for the transplants, and save more lives. Again, I would like to thank Senator Wynn for her sponsorship of this legislation, and I would like to ask for all of your support with SB 109. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Warren. And I believe Dr. Knight is next. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. You can hear me now, hopefully. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Laura Knight. For the record, Madam Chair, Dr. Laura Knight from the Washoe County Regional Medical Examiner's Office. I serve as Chief Medical Examiner and Coroner, and I'm speaking here today in my official capacity, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to appear by Zoom as I had many autopsies to do today. Thank you for the opportunity to support this bill, SB 109, for reasons already stated, including the long list of Nevadans awaiting a life-saving transplant. We must do everything we can to preserve the opportunity for organ donation. My office works very hard to facilitate postmortem organ donation whenever possible in compliance with law, as Nevada law states that we should collaborate and facilitate organ donation and transplantation whenever possible, while maintaining our mission to determine the cause and manner of death. The occasion for the medical examiner or coroner to authorize donation in lieu of next of kin consent when a next of kin is not available will arise very infrequently. Such occasions currently where there are no next of kin available and a patient is clinically diagnosed with brain death and eligible to be an organ donor are very rare. I anticipate that this would be a very small number of cases. So this is not a wide-ranging change, but it is important nonetheless because every single organ potentially saves a Nevadan's life. And the reason that it will be a low number of cases, this is partially related to the relatively small number of potential organ donors, as well as the fact that my office and the Southern Nevada, my counterpart there, the Clark County Medical Examiner's Office, we go to great lengths to identify a next of kin or other suitable individual to provide the authorization. And I'll go through a list of some of the techniques that my office and the Clark County office both use in order to locate family. First of all, we have a large number of resources in databases online that create or house a lot of information about people, including their known associates, family members, neighbors, roommates, all previous addresses, etc., with contact information. And so we're often able to go straight into this database, which is only available to law enforcement and other investigative agencies, and immediately find people who know something about the deceased individual. We go on to contact government services, social organizations, such as homeless shelters and child and adult protective services, housing and food assistance, who may have encountered the decedent and may have information such as emergency contacts. We check for arrest reports with law enforcement. We obtain medical records from hospitals, including identifying information about emergency contacts, which are always provided on hospitalization. We interview friends and neighbors and witnesses around the scene of the death. We have even gone so far as to canvass local homeless shelters and homeless encampments where someone was known to frequent in order to find out their name and who they may be related to or know. Finally, if they have any personal a telephone with them or a personal address book, we will call all numbers in those resources. So as you can see from this laundry list, we are very resourceful. We go even as far as court and government documents, online public record databases, and then finally online social media. Social media actually is a huge resource for us in identifying people connected to an individual. And so we do have a lot of access to find the next of kin. So I think it's going to be pretty rare that we actually utilize this new tool. However, I don't want to minimize the importance of it. I think it's important that we have the ability to authorize donation when there is no one else to do so. And so that is most of my comments. I just wanted to point out the links we go to actually find the next of kin, and that in the majority of cases we're going to locate the next of kin, and that would be our preference to do that as well, as rather than authorizing the donation ourselves. But in those rare cases where no one can be found, it will fall to us under this law, and we will take that responsibility very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Knight. Please go ahead.
If I could just follow up just one moment. Sorry, I'm a little fangirling over Dr. Knight. I know many of you that were able to attend the Nevada Donor Network dinner at the Governor's Mansion. She was the inaugural award recipient of the Governor Lombardo's and the Nevada Donor Network's Award of Excellence. So she has an amazing career, and I'm so grateful that she has provided that information, because I think that's super important for this committee to understand. And again, I will make it abundantly clear, without this law, there aren't these added protections that exist. They are doing this as a part of their practice, but we want to codify those more stringent protections in place for that category J, which is any other person having the authority to dispose of the decedent's body. That is current law. So this amendment and this law, as a part of Senate Bill 109, actually makes it more strict, puts more protections in place to make sure that procurement organizations like the Nevada Donor Network are doing that extra due diligence, in addition to working with the coroners in those rare circumstances where they are. And in fact, sometimes through their efforts, working in coordination with law enforcement, working in coordination with this investigation, they're actually able to locate family members that normally wouldn't have connections to those loved ones that are at the end of their lives. So with that, we are ready for any questions the committee might have.
Thank you for the presentation. We have several questions. We'll go ahead and start with Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Nguyen, good seeing you again. It's been your week. I like the bill, but I don't like the bill. I am that conflicted. I mean, we need so many organs out there, but trampling on somebody's rights in that case without knowing just kind of, I don't know, it creates a real conflict in me. If we don't know, then we default, even though we go to the courts. But what I'm wondering, is there a better way to do it? Well, let me preface this. I'm not that concerned about the homeless issue, the illegal immigrant issue. I don't think that's going to happen. I got to tell you, and some of the people on this committee know, 2 weeks ago, my homeless brother was found dead on the side of a freeway. That could have been the one time in his life in 65 years that he probably could have done something good for society. And I know if he had probably carried a license or anything else, he probably would have signed up for it. But it's so I don't see the harm in that. But what I'm wondering is, I mean, we've got these little red hearts on our licenses. Couldn't we go to something where where we could enact this, but they could go to, say, and I'm just going to use this. I know it's not a very nice one, but couldn't we use a black heart or something? I mean, it's something that indicates they are absolutely in no way a donor. And you could either have the red heart to be affirmative or nothing to be, I don't care. I mean, I think people's last wishes, if they can be identified, need to be honored. I mean, that's the last thing they're asking for.
Chair, if I may, directly to the Assemblyman.
Please,
Dan Musgrove. To your point, there has been discussion throughout the country about the difference between an opt-in and an opt-out, where instead of when you go to the DMV, you make a conscious decision to opt in to be a donor, that it would default to making you a donor unless you opted out. That's not been done in the United States. It's been tried in a couple of foreign countries, and you would think that that would be a good thing but I think to your point, what happens is now you've made an absolute affirmation that you don't want to be a donor. And unfortunately, if something happens and maybe on your deathbed, you let the family member know, you know what, I've changed my mind. I want to do that gift of life. We, as an organ procurement organization, would be hard-pressed to go against what was on that license that said you opted out, that you made an affirmation that you do not want to be a donor. How often do we go to the DMV to get our license changed, and what a laborious process that would be? The potential is that someone could have a change of mind, neglects to change it on their license, and so we would have to default to the no. And so that's why just about every state who's seen that legislation, and we actually had a bill, I think, last session where it was brought, but it was determined that it worked in exactly the way I described. So to your point, sir, I think we certainly don't feel that we're trampling on an individual's rights. I think that, as the senator said, every religious organization supports it. They think that it's more humane to be the gift of life, and if tragically, if somehow all the due diligence that we did to try to find a next of kin and it came out that down the road someone came forward, I think they would feel exactly as you did, that maybe for the first time that person had the ability to do something very, very precious. And I think you'll hear from a couple of folks who got that call and what their relationship to their organ donor is. It's something that's so meaningful that I think that in this very narrow circumstance, I would hate to say we're trampling on an individual's rights, because I think we're trying to look in the best interest of the whole. So thank you for the question.
And Rochelle Wynn, for the record, I'd also have you look at the statute as it currently exists in law. Without this protection, there isn't that added level of having to do that due diligence. There isn't that added level of having to go to the court. There isn't that level of definition and certainty to give those extra added protections for a process that may make people feel uncomfortable, and understandably so. What this bill does is it actually puts more protections in place, puts more responsibility on those procurement organizations to do more outreach.
Senator Wynn, a quick follow-on question. Chair said I could do it. So, having been down this road before and dealt with this, how are you going to get the intimate medical history that you're going to need to identify which organs are going to be able to be, and I'm used to using the word harvested, I'm sorry, but to be able to be used, for that gift of life? And like I said, I'm really conflicted here, but I know that I think we spent probably close to 3 hours, on one of these calls one time, these interviews. How are you going to do that same due diligence with your patients receiving the organs, if you don't have the history?
I think the Nevada Donor Network might be in the best position to talk about that. So if I can.
Ms. Warren, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. Again, for the record, this is Jackie Warren. I do want to just reemphasize the fact of when we are entertaining or pursuing an opportunity for donation as it relates to SB 109, these patients are under the care of a hospital, a physician, and a whole medical team. Therefore, many many tests are being performed. Sometimes there are individuals that may have additional information, but we rely on the testing and the clinical outcomes from our physicians and other medical care. So we do have, albeit at times there may be limited medical records available, but because of the battery of tests that are required, and especially under the umbrella of UNOS, United Network of Organ Sharing, there is criteria in testing, especially for communicable diseases, that is performed to ensure moving forward with donation that these would be safe organs for transplant for any recipient. I hope I was able to answer your question. Thank you.
It led to one more question.
Okay, this is why we got started an hour early. Please go ahead, Assemblyman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging me. Like I said, this is something I am passionate about. I do believe in organ donation, absolutely, and wholeheartedly. But so if you've got the time to do that kind of testing and this person is already in the hospital, how is it there is no way to contact any next of kin or anything? I just don't. I mean, the timelines aren't jiving, especially when we talk about, patients coming in that may have been homeless or, other undocumented type of patients, not undocumented aliens, just undocumented patients.
Chair Dan Musgrove, to the Assemblyman's question, we do, and I think Dr. Knight, has outlined all that we will attempt to do. And again, it is so rare that we haven't been able to find that next of kin or friend or caregiver out there that, again, we don't believe this will happen more than perhaps one time a year here in the state of Nevada. But for us, it's willing to bring this issue in front of you to debate it because that one person could save one person's life. And I think, again, we just don't believe that it's going to happen, to your point, often. But it's worth this exercise, I believe.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. I promise that was my last question.
And I believe the senator said it in her introductory remarks that they're codifying the process of tracking folks down, which right now is policy and it's best practice, but it is not required under the current statute. So it's not about getting around the obligation to look for that next of kin or the responsible party to make the decision. It's really about codifying that process to ensure that it's best practice that's implemented, I believe. I have another question from Assemblywoman Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senator and Mr. Musgrove, for bringing this forward. My colleague, Assemblyperson Gray, asked one of the questions I had, which was pertaining to the medical records review. In that, and I'm going to just ask for a couple of clarifying questions, if I may. Is that you're utilizing the data, this may be better for the donor network, that's available because that person is in the hospital and so on. It isn't, because I'm looking at, is that data going to be private or protected? How do they ensure that there's some protection around that? I think it's great to do the work Can you find somebody? I think that's clear. You do the list that Dr. Knight shared and all the things that are done to try to find somebody. I think that's clearly important. I don't know what's left, from there. I mean, that's great. But so on the medical information side, how do you make sure that that data is just going the place it should go? Because even though this person is going to be deceased fairly soon, we want to protect their information as well.
Rochelle Wynn for the record. I know that this industry, and it's not something that I was familiar with until I became involved with the Nevada Donor Network. When I learned about the disparities our communities of color and Nevadans of color face when it comes to organ donation and organ procurement, because it is very disproportionate. So that's where my background came in. And I asked some of those same questions initially when I met with them, like I think in 2019. About the process that they go through in determining any organ donation. There's lots of standards to be able to procure organs even from willing and knowing donors. And so I think Ms. Warren could further highlight, again, I think she touched on it a little bit, but how those records are procured from someone who has no next of kin or they're in the process of looking for that next of kin.
Ms. Warren, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Jackie Warren for the record. Just to further expand upon the medical records within the hospital, under CMS, conditions of participation, and organ procurement organizations such as us, as Nevada Donor Network, have contracts or MOUs with each of the hospitals that specifically state the sharing of medical information for the sole purposes of transplantation, for evaluating and assessing an individual for transplantation. So as far as sharing that information, that is part of the CMS regulations, and it is written with each one of the hospitals by which we are required to have both the hospital and the organ procurement organization by CMS is required to have these memorandums of understanding or contracts. So with that said, that as every individual that is going in, they are under that medical care. So through that period, of course, first and foremost, it is the responsibility and the obligation of the care team to do all they can to help that individual, to try to save that individual, to provide the treatment to that individual. And all while that workup is taking place, records are being created. So it is first that the care is given, but if under certain circumstances a patient does come close to their demise, that is when Nevada Donor Network, as the organ procurement organization, is notified and is provided the opportunity to start to assess and determine if whether or not this individual would be a candidate for donation. Meanwhile, if it is a John Doe or Jane Doe, efforts by the hospital, very much so of what Dr. Knight has shared, it's the same process by which we work collaboratively with the hospital and with the coroner medical examiner to try to identify. So there are many moving parts all at one time. But I wanted to make sure to emphasize how we have the ability and that sharing of that medical information for the sole purposes of evaluating for donation.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Warren.
you.
No, thank you very much. That makes a lot of sense. And just one more for clarity. Other states, you mentioned 4 or 5 of them. I think it was Arizona, California, Florida, Oregon, may have been a Michigan in there. Do most states have this? Can you give me an idea of where this can happen in those rare cases when you can't find someone?
This is Jackie Warren for the record. Yes, most states do have provisions that are written in. We specifically looked at a diverse group of states so that we would be able to share with all of you as committee members that there are states of different demographics, different leadership, political leadership and oversights that do have these provisions that are written in, which is aiding donation in those states when such circumstances come up. I can share, having worked in other states and having had legislation just as this in regulation, it has come into effect where it was used. But But again, it was rare. It is not something of the norm. Due diligence is taken place. Most certainly, we would love to identify who those individuals' loved ones are and have that conversation. But even if donation isn't a yes, for whatever reasons that may be, and that may be the result of what Dr. Knight or any other coroner or medical examiner may conclude because of the circumstances of that individual, I think we all would like to see that reuniting of someone's loved one with that individual. Most certainly would be, most meaningful in those circumstances.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, I have Assemblyman Hibbets next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody, for the presentation. There's 17 people here. My question is, if this is simply codifying what is already being done, in essence, why not just strike section, or subsection J of section 5? Make it easy.
Chair, to the question, it isn't being done because when there isn't anybody that meets those categories, then the process stops. So we're actually, I mean, we have been very hesitant to use that provision that we're striking where it talks about any other person having the authority. And this is a very litigious society, and we certainly don't want to put ourselves in a position to err. And so that final category, I mean, some states allow the hospital executive to do it. That's why we looked at a number of states. And one of the things that, for those of you who sit on judiciary, you probably understand that there are uniform acts that all states and perhaps your legal counsel, this is one of those, Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. And so there's a framework of things that every state has adopted, but there are certain circumstances where a state can go a little bit further. And that's where we felt that it was important to go 2 steps further. Brain death, we allow the coroner medical examiner, and if there's no one else, we would go to the court, because we want a third party to help us ensure that we've done the right due diligence that, as you've all talked to about and questioned us about, to make sure that we aren't erring and making a mistake by going against someone's wishes or a family member's wishes. And even if, again, sorry, Senator, even if a person marks has a red heart on their license, if the family member comes to us and tells us, we don't want to do it, we always yield to the family, even though that person has made that conscious choice, because we certainly we want this to be a welcoming experience for everybody involved, especially those who might get the organ.
Rochelle Wynn for the record. I think it's really important to say that you have that J in there, and it's so vague and ambiguous that people could use that if they want to, but we wanted to have that extra protection because it is such a sensitive issue. We are not there where everyone is comfortable with organ donation. That's just the fact. That's why we don't have an opt-in or an opt-out kind of situation on your license right now. But you look at some of these other categories that we're not even beginning to touch. I mean, if you look at section 5, it's on page 3, and you look at H. H is an adult who exhibited special care and concern for the decedent. So that's not even defined in statute. So that is left up for, so if you have someone that comes in and is like, I have a special concern and I'm gonna donate this person's organs, that person takes precedent, and that would be included already in our existing law. So I really do think that this gives more direction, more protections for those unknown circumstances in such a limited thing. And it is a limited thing. And I think it's whether or not it is our policy in those limited circumstances to save just one more life, or to potentially save 7 more lives, depending on how many organs might be there, or it could be even more than that. I think, that's kind of where we are on that. I don't know if that answers some of your questions.
Thank you. It does. So from what I'm understanding, we struck J and put in the person appointed by the court. And then if you fast forward to, where am I? Section 5, subsection 4, which is the new portion of the law. Now, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, although I have played one on TV before. I have stated a Holiday Inn. Can you tell me how often does a judge reject an ex parte order? Has it ever been done?
I don't think we've ever had this process in place.
I don't mean specifically for this process. I mean in general, an ex parte order.
Rochelle
with no
went for the
hearing.
record. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows on that? I mean, there are ex parte orders, you know, throughout the justice system, whether it's civil cases, family cases, you know, eviction cases, criminal cases. So how many times those are rejected, I wouldn't know. I could probably contact the Office of the Courts and they may keep those statistics. But for those of you who serve on judiciary, they probably don't keep those statistics.
I doubt that they do. I was just wondering if you knew of any in your private sector employment. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the questions. I have Assemblyman Ornlicker next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. And Mr. Musgrove correctly referred to the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. And while I like the idea of that the proposal here, I think has, as for the reasons you articulated about we need to save lives, I do think it's fair to say it's a departure from the Anatomical Gift Act, that the Section 1 coroner provision was something that was in an earlier version and removed from the most recent version of the Anatomical Gift Act. And that Section J, if you look at the comments of the act, it was, they indicate that this is going to be used in cases where too much time has passed for organs, and you might get eyes or tissue, but not organs. That was their expectation. Of course, states have used it have deviated from the Anatomical Gift Act. And maybe, for the reasons you've given, maybe the Anatomical Gift Act got it wrong. But one thing that I think is important is when you look at California's authorization that we're modeling, that we're following, as Dr. Knight said, it's important to have these very careful steps to make sure you do everything you can to make sure you can find a next of kin or other spokesperson. California codifies those steps, or many of them. And I think that's important because the reason why the Anatomical Gift Act took out what what's proposed in Section 1 is because there were coroners who weren't as scrupulous as Dr. Knight in Los Angeles and Cincinnati that led to unfortunate court cases. And so we don't always know which kind, are we going to get a Dr. Brotherton or are we going to get a Dr. Knight? Dr. Brotherton being one of the scandalous coroners. So I think it might make more sense to follow California and put the kinds of steps in statute so that we make sure that they really are followed and that careful efforts aren't made. So I appreciate your thoughts about why, rather than taking the California model saying you have to take reasonable steps, here are reasonable steps. We just say you have to make sure that you look for a reasonably available person without saying what that means.
I'll give it a shot, Senator. Dan Musgrove. One of the things I think that, to your point, especially when it came to the coroner medical examiner provision, we ensured that this would be for transplant only. It could not be for tissue. It could not be for research. It could not be for any other purposes, to make sure, again, we are getting into a very finite set of circumstances. The other thing that we wanted to make sure was very clear that this had to be the subject of a valid anatomical gift. So all the other questions that we talked about in terms of verifying that this indeed would be a an organ that is transplantable. And the coroner, we also specified that the coroner, not only will the coroner do her due diligence, but we will be required both in the case of working with the coroner, but more importantly, when we work with the district court, that we too have done our due diligence before we can ever even bring that request of the court to ensure that, again, no persons in the prior classes are available, and that there's been no evidence that there's been a communication by the individual of a yay or a nay on how they feel about organ donation. So I don't know if there is a state agency that regulates this, whether that'd be something to put in regulation. That I don't know. I don't know if there are regulations that do this. But as you said, Assemblyman, I think that there is proof that other states have gone a step further than what the Uniform Act is. And I think the last time the Uniform Act was, and you would know this better than I, because I don't even want to pretend to be a lawyer or teach law school, but I think the last time the Uniform Gift Act was touched was in 2003, if my memory serves me correctly. And I think maybe we've learned a lot, as you said, since then. And so I guess we're leaving it up to this committee to decide what is the appropriate thing to do with SB 109.
And I think I probably lean towards giving more discretion. Obviously, we could put every single step in here, but we've heard from our coroner on what the practice is, on what they would anticipate that they would have to go through. And so rather than being so prescriptive in statute about those requirements, I think that is where I would tend to lead, just because things change, technology changes. If we put in social media and in 5 years social media was not a thing, it would be forever codified in statute that we have to go through that process. So I think sometimes we can be overly prescriptive in what we require people or mandate people to do in statute.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that concern, and just small correction, it was 2006, but you're right, it's been a while. So, yeah, here's my reason why I would lean toward, and I appreciate your thoughts about maybe why it makes sense to be more prescriptive. One of the concerns in this area, as you know, is our organ procurement system is built heavily on trust. We want people to donate organs, and they need to appreciate that their body will be treated as they requested. And what happened with those coroners in Los Angeles and Cincinnati, because they didn't do what they were supposed to do, it led the removal of Section 1. Every state had something like that. Not every state, a lot did. And so it was kind of a step backward. And so it seems to me we should err more on the side of doing everything we can, taking the extra steps to assure the public that our coroners will be like Dr. Knight and not like the unscrupulous coroners, and that putting stuff in statute like California is a way to preserve trust. Does that make sense?
Rochelle Lynn, for the record, I understand and appreciate that. I know that when you, and I'm sure Ms. Warren can talk about this from the perspective of the Nevada Donor Network, so much of their campaign is just educating people on organ donation, educating people on long-term myths, how they can approach different communities that are in need of organs to become organ donors. So I trust them when they are comfortable with this language that they've come up with, that this will also feed into or help support their overall mission of educating people on proper organ donation and dispelling a lot of those myths. But I don't know, do you have anything further to say?
With your indulgence, Chair Dan Musgrove, the only thing that I would add to that, because I think there is something on Nellis from perhaps someone who will be testifying in opposition about what's going on currently with the organ donation system nationwide. There is a great deal of scrutiny. CMS, for one, is reevaluating how they rank organizations and ensuring that this is a process that does in fact get as this is the wrong, helps to procure as many organs as possible because there are certainly a number of people. But I can assure you that Nevada Donor Network, on any spectrum metric that is out there, is either number one or in the top 5 worldwide when it comes to OPOs. And CMS has actually come to review our policies and has used them as a guideline for others because we are one of the best, if not the best, in the country and world. And I think that, again, we have to put some trust in what they're going to do. But I think that the fact that they believe that this is one more tool that they'd like to have in their toolbox, I think it's up to this committee to decide whether you want to amend the bill further or not. I would agree with Senator Wynn that I think we're in a good spot right now in terms of the protections, both for family members, individuals, and the process, and we certainly would like to see it proceed as it is.
Thank you, Assemblyman. We have Assemblywoman Gorlow next.
Thank you very much. Most of my questions you've already asked, but I kind of want to go back to the process of looking for family members and get a little bit better sense of the timeline of that. Does that take, like, obviously it's going to vary for the individual, but is that something you look at like a day, couple days? And what happens when you find family members and they disagree on if the organ should be donated or not?
Dr. Knight or Ms. Warren, I think you'd probably be in the best position to answer, or a combination of that question.
Dr. Knight here, I can address the first part of that, at least, that process could take anywhere from a couple of hours to multiple days, depending on, the difficulty of locating someone. There are times where just a quick look in the Accurant and LexisNexis database that's accessible to investigative agencies will allow us to identify someone, make a couple of phone calls, find that we have their correct contact, and then provide that information to the donor network so that they may go on to have the conversation about consent. And the second part I would leave to my counterparts at Nevada Donor Network.
Thank you, Jackie Warren, for the record. To help address the second part of that question is because of the due diligence that is done and the extensive search that is made in order to identify the individual and potentially a next of kin. There is nothing hasty that is being done. All of those avenues are exhausted before Dr. Knight or any other coroner, medical examiner, or that we would elevate it to the courts, would take before a decision would be made. However, if after the fact and time has lapsed and someone has come forward as the next of kin, we most certainly, as an organization of organ procurement organization, we will have this discussion with the family. We will share with that individual the efforts that were made. And also state, we were not aware of any no to donation, and it was made in good faith effort, the final decision beforehand. Now, with that said, we hope to bring the family some peace and solace to know that that decision was made and that good will move forward from the life-saving gifts that were given. However, sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a while for a family member to be able to comprehend or to come to terms with the final decision that was made. But as an organization, as an organ procurement organization, we continue to work with that family, to support that family. It may be part of their bereavement and grieving process as well. So we won't walk away from anyone that has come forward, whether early on in the decision-making process or after that decision has been made, and we will provide that support and be there for them to ask the questions and provide them any information that they would need.
And I think Rochelle went to, for the record, I think to answer the question is if that person is located while prior to the procurement of the organs and that family member says no, they will not proceed with that. any further. And again, there are multiple layers, and there's not only the procurement organization, there's the coroner that is doing the due diligence, it is the hospital that is also doing that due diligence, and then even after all of that, everyone's agreed that this is a potential candidate. It has to go to the district court for that order to be signed as well. So there are so many different agencies and organizations that are a part of this that would have to have layers of protection. But I think your question was, if someone comes forward and you haven't done the procurement yet, and they say, no, I don't want this, I don't want my loved one now that you've located me, they wouldn't seek the procurement at that point.
Thank you for that. My question is more like, you found two people. You found a parent and you found a sibling. And one says yes, one says no. So do we default then to the no, let them rock, paper, scissor it? How do we decide at that point?
This is Jackie Warren, for the record. In accordance to the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, there is that order of hierarchy by which an individual has the authority to make the decision. So in the instance of what you have shared, it is, I think you had said, a parent and then a child. So the parent would be able to be that decision maker. Now, if there is, that's sometimes dynamics of the family could draw about those different decisions, but ultimately we would lean on the individual with the highest authority according to law to be able to provide that decision.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's really interesting. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just ask if you guys could talk a little bit about Section 1, Subsection 2, which is the liability immunity. Can you just tell us a little bit about where that comes from and the intention for that piece?
Chair Dan Musgrove, that was a request from both Washoe and Clark County, specifically for the coroner or medical examiner to have that liability. And I will tell you that the Nevada Justice Association looked at that and did not have any issue with that. So it was a request by their legal counsel that they receive some kind of immunity for a decision as long as we went through all those processes.
I was just going to ask that. And is it typical in other states that have adopted measures similar to this to have that kind of liability clause in the law?
Dan Musgrove, I do not know.
Rochelle Wynn, for the record, we can get that information for you, though.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you so much. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move into testimony.
I'll talk to the senator.
Yeah, we can take our comments offline. We have a couple folks who've got meetings to attend after this presentation. So we'll move into testimony on Senate Bill 109. We'll start in support here in Carson City and Las Vegas and then move to the phones. I'm not seeing anybody come up to the table in Carson City. Now I am. Please remember to state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Mindy Elliott. I'm here representing myself today. First, I'm on the board of the Foundation for the Nevada Donor Network, but on a personal level, on November 22nd, 1968, my father became the 8th heart transplant at Stanford and was the 86th heart transplant in the world. He was 49 years old, a World War II hero, a highly decorated colonel in the Air Force, and he died at age 49. If it wasn't for the fact that a motorcycle accident occurred, my AB negative father would not have had another year of life. Fast forward to 5 years ago, where my younger sister was killed in a motorcycle accident. And she was a donor, but they couldn't get to her fast enough. She was in rural California and she couldn't donate. Fast forward to January 5th, 2021, and my husband, when he died, the nurse came in and said, call the donor, call the OPO. I knew exactly what they were saying, but at the time, I completely forgot that Steve Elliott, Judge Elliott, District Court Judge Elliott, had put on his driver's license that he was a donor. Families have a difficult time making these decisions. but we have so many people that we have all known and people that we have touched that have been benefactors of the fact that we have these laws on the books. I'm proud of the fact that Nevada does an incredible job when it comes to transplantation. Nevada Donor Network and the OPOs around the country are doing such a service as they're saving lives, whether it's children, whether it's adults. Nick Vanderpool, my son, actually was a donor for bone marrow. Went to a basketball game, did joke, got swabbed. Next thing you know, he's being flown to Arizona to save someone's life. All of us are touched by this. I understand it's a very difficult and complex conversation. I, for one, can appreciate all the fact that we are cautious as we approach in this bill. But personally, I just want you to think about if it's your family, if it's your neighbor, if it's your child, the impact that this bill will have. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Dr. Cole.
Very cool. Barycole. Stop laughing up there. Okay, back to being a neurologist. A tragedy could be defined as burning or burying a body with perfectly good organs. That's a tragedy, really, if you think about it. In my career, I've seen two groups of patients who could become effectively organ donors. The first group are those who come through the emergency room, they're dead on arrival. We almost can't get it figured out fast enough. But then there's a whole group of people that wind up in critical care ICUs, neuro ICUs, and over days we determine they are brain dead. To determine you are brain dead, I have to do 2 electroencephalograms 24 hours apart that are basically flatlined twice, and you may not be receiving any medications that could sedate you, paralyze you, and your body temperature has to be normal. So the notion is nobody's dead till they're warm and dead. Some of you may have heard that if you're into Boy Scouts or survival. But this is really something where we can almost plan the moment of disconnection. We can almost coordinate getting somebody to the operating room to have organs procured. It's just such a wonderful act. Thank you for having your heart on your card. Hopefully every one of us has that donor heart on our ID. To me, it's usually somebody just didn't ask you, because I meet so few people in my entire life who ever said, I absolutely refuse to be a donor. Even my most religious in-laws, they want to be organ donors too. So the default, all the debate about safeguards, I really just don't see this as a high-risk endeavor. And if one living, dying person can save a half a dozen or more, that is a good public policy. So I'm going to be in support of SB 109. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no one else coming up to the table in Carson City, we'll go ahead to Mr. Gray in Las Vegas. Welcome. Please remember to state your name.
Good afternoon, committee. This is Tyree Gray for the record. As many of you know me as a lobbyist in that building for a number of years, and or the former president of the not of the United States, but of the Nevada Mining Association. But I now have the privilege of serving as the Chief Administrative Officer for the Nevada Donor Network. But I am coming to you in a personal capacity today because many of you may not know that I am also a kidney transplant recipient. Many of the questions that have been asked today, I really hope to put a human face on what transplant does. Many of us who have either received transplants or who are dealing with illnesses that may require transplants don't talk about it. I was 23 when I was diagnosed, and I never talked about it. I personally know 4 people who are walking around in that building right now who are organ transplant recipients. And some of them may be in the room and they may not be in the room because it's something that, unfortunately, our society still has a bit of a stigma with. And I hope to help to relieve some of that stigma. When being diagnosed at 23 with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, which is a lot of letters to just basically say that my body was attacking itself, again, I admit to not speaking about it. But that set off a process that no one could really, imagine. You're 23. You're usually supposed to be tackling the world, figuring out what you want to do. But every aspect of my life was impacted. Where I lived, where I could work, the people who I socialized with, all of that was something that I had to think about. And so many of the opportunities that you think about taking when you're 23, I was foreclosed upon taking. And for 9 years, I waited on the transplant list. I was listed in California. I traveled to Arizona to be listed here in Nevada. And my health began to fail, and I started to have just hope to hold on to, and I decided to enroll in law school. And for me, I'll never forget the day that I got the call. It was September 12th of 2012. And in fact, I have a band here that I have on my wrist that says, donate life 9/12/12. And it's just a reminder. It was a gift to me, but to remind of that special day. And I'll never forget it. I was actually sitting in my tax law class of all classes, and my phone rang 3 times from a number I didn't recognize. And the person said, "Is Tyre Gray there?" And I was like, "Oh, well, Tyree, yes. How can I help you?" And she said, actually, I think I can help you today. I have an organ kidney for you. How quickly can you get down to UMC? And I just remember the overwhelming emotion being in law school. I ran and I talked to Dean Durant, who some of you there who are alumnus of the Boyd Law School know Dean Durant. And he was just like, "Get out of here. We could figure this all out. Go get it." And I will say that this gift of life transformed my life. In the 3,885 days since my transplant, I've been able to achieve amazing things. I graduated from law school near the top of my class. I became the first African-American leader of a major trade association. But none of those things are nearly as important as the fact that I was able to become the father of Rain and Adonis Gray. I could not have kids before this transplant, and now I have 2 beautiful children. So in closing, what I'll say is, if I could ask a simple question, if you could save 900 lives over a decade, would your answer be yes? And if your answer would be yes, then SB 109 really helps to facilitate that. Again, it is really just a clarification of processes that are happening, of law that is already in place, and making sure that we are able to help to clear up ambiguity. And because of that ambiguity in our law, we know that roughly 900 lives have not either been saved or healed, because one donor can impact up to 75 different lives. And that number is just unacceptable, in my opinion, in Nevada. So, I harp on the fact that I am one of the lucky ones. Since my transplant over 3,000 days ago, over 60,000 Americans have died while waiting on the list. And Nevada, we have our opportunity to reduce that number. We have our opportunity to change that number by simply passing SB 109. So I thank Senator Nguyen for her help. I appreciate all of you on the committee for your consideration. And again, I just ask that you please support SB 109, because the life that you could save could be the next me, the next you, and or the next president of the United States. Who knows? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. I don't see anyone else coming to the table down in Las Vegas, so we will go to the phones. BPS, is there anyone on the public line for support testimony on Senate Bill 109?
To testify in support of Senate Bill 109, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last number 505, please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Hi, this is Peter Guzman, and as the president of the Latin Chamber of Commerce, I have been working with the Nevada Donor Network for the past several years in an effort, a real effort, to educate the Latino community on the importance of organ, eye, and tissue donation. I am now a proud governing board member of NDN because I believe in it so strongly. We have been supportive of NDN since day one when we launched Corazón de Esperanza, Heart of Hope, a campaign in an effort to spread awareness and to address some of the myths surrounding organ and tissue donation amongst the Latino community and businesses. The NDN leadership team has been to several of our annual galas and luncheons, speaking and educating families and children on this very important issue. Regarding SB 109, this is to clarify an existing process already codified in NRS 451. What we know is that there are over 100,000 Americans waiting on a transplant, and that one donor can make an impact up to 75 lives. I literally was blown away when I learned that. Over the past 10 years, this issue has arisen about a dozen times, which is not much. However, that means that 900 people were not helped because of an ambiguity in the current law. NDN and the government agencies that would refer a patient to NDN are fiercely dedicated to making sure that the lives are safe and people are healed by the gift of transplant. SB 109 makes the process of administering the gift of life more fluid and efficient. My efforts alongside Nevada Donor Network are aimed at saving and healing lives, not taking lives. We are in full support, and I ask you to do the same. And I thank you for the privilege and honor of being able to testify in these chambers.
Thank you for your testimony. BPS, is there anyone else to testify in support?
Chair, there are no callers to testify in support at this time.
We'll go ahead and move into opposition testimony on Senate Bill 109. We'll start here in Carson City and Las Vegas. If there are folks who'd like to testify in opposition, please come up to the table. And remember to say your name for the record, and you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Janine Hansen. I'm the state president of Nevada Families for Freedom. And of course, we do not oppose organ donation. We have some concerns about this particular bill and some of the issues surrounding it. It appears that this bill is designed to protect the procurement organizations. On page 4, when you read on line 18, it changes the basic default position in Nevada law. It changes it when it says no evidence exists of the decedent having communicated a desire that his or her body or part not become anatomical gifts, including without limitation through the refusal that has not been revoked. So essentially it changes the automatic default position from no to yes. That's our concern because this is where it starts, and we have concerns about what happens in the future. The other issue, and I really appreciated Assemblyman Orlicher's concerns and his suggestion that there should be put in this particular piece of legislation the specifics of what needs to happen in the coroner's office and to present to the court, specifically as to what they should do. Because it's wonderful to have a good coroner like that in Washoe County, but we don't know what will happen in every single county. We don't know what will happen in the future. And I think it's good in the basis of law to have things clearly identified so that people can feel comfortable in what they determine to do. And I think that's, as he said, it has to do with trust. I read some articles, and I sent one of them to all of you on email today about the shocking mismanagement that takes place in our organ donation system, causing needless death. In fact, the U.S. Senate Finance Committee has done a probe into U.S. organ transplant system, and they said recent reports of lapses in patient safety, misuse of taxpayer dollars, and tens of thousands of organs going unrecovered or not transplanted lead us to question the adequacy of the United Network for Organ Sharing. When I'm using just the letters OPO, it means Organ Procurement Organization, or OPTN, it means Organ Procurement Transplantation Network. The federal HHS has deemed that the majority of OPOs are failing key performance metrics, contributing to 33 Americans dying every day for the lack of an organ transplant. The U.S. Senate investigation of these organizations said there were serious concerns related to its role in overseeing the nation's OPOs, which have been severely underperforming for decades. The OPOs have jaw-dropping, tenfold variability in how well they serve Black communities, and in the past, NAACP President Vangelis and one of us has written, fewer Black donors means fewer Black recipients, which means more Black deaths, prompting congressional leaders to call OPOs reform an urgent health equity issue. We've talked a lot about this idea of equity in this building, as I recall. OPOs have problems that run deeper than failure to recover organs. They have high-profile examples of misspent taxpayer money, criminality, and fatal lapses in patient safety, prompting the bipartisan Senate investigation and the Oversight Committee last October to express their concerns. The higher organ donation rates in the U.S. actually reflect a higher levels of societal ills like the massive use of overdoses with opioids in the United States. In fact, while 90% of Americans support organ donation, a federally funded report found that the OPOs may be recovering only 1 in 5 potential donors. So there's problems going on in this particular area, and I'll finish right now. The federal HHS, as this Dr. Patel, PhD, and former chief data scientist says, should heed the call from the New York Times editorial board to revisit organ procurement transport network monopoly and pursue all options for reforms to deliver more transparent, effective, and patient-centered OPTNs. We support organ transplant. We are concerned with some of the issues of this particular bill, particularly changing the default and not having more specifics. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you. I think you said that you had sent us those notes in an email, so we have
Yes, I
that
sent
resource.
this article, The Shocking Mismanagement of the System, to all of you on email, and I also sent it to the committee manager, and I gave her a copy.
Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair and Committee, my name is Lynn Chapman, and I'm State Vice President of Nevada Eagle Forum. I would like to start off by saying that my favorite sister-in-law 30 years ago was number 418th person to receive a heart transplant from UCLA, when we were blessed to have her for another 13 years. And when my brother was killed in 2003, he had listed on his driver's license that he wanted to be a donor, and he had many donations of his body made that day that he died. And in his death, he helped save many lives. And almost 1.5 years ago, I donated my husband's eyes. My family has been involved in both sides of the issue, in giving and receiving. So obviously we're in support of donation, but I feel that only if a person has in advance made that decision. Everyone knows that the DMV has many links for information and signing up for body donation and tissue donation, and there are many PSAs on TV and radio that we've heard over the years. Most people know where to find out information. They go on the internet, they can go on websites, etc., and where to sign up if they're interested in doing so. But I always worry about the people that are not informed at the DMV when receiving their licenses. What if people change their mind at the end of their lives? What do they do? How do they stop or want to donate? I made many notes here, I'm sorry. I think we should maybe have an awareness month, many PSAs, public service announcements, to help people make decisions, because this is an extremely important decision for people to make. And I would like to say I appreciate Assemblyman Urlacher's points that he made. Thank you. I think one of the most important one was trust. So we have to look at trust for doctors, for coroners' offices, for organizations, for government, and for courts. Do we really trust all of them? We have to trust them to make the right decisions. So that's why I'm not really in favor of this bill completely, because of the trust that we don't always get. So please think long and hard about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just right before you begin, I just want to thank you both for ensuring that you were spelling out acronyms. That really helps us. And I'm not always great at catching it, but I appreciate that. Please go ahead.
Melissa Clement, Nevada Right to Life, MELISSA CLEMENT. We're firmly in favor of organ donations. I mean, these were some of the most moving stories I've heard today. And so it makes it very hard to come up here because I want to just say, go for it. But there's a part of me that just is very concerned about opt-in versus opt-out. And so I just would like to encourage you all to really think about that and provide some safeguards. The coroner that was on was outstanding, and I know she. I mean, I totally trust her with my body, but you know, you have to think about everybody at every time. So, gosh, you guys have a hard job, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you. Seeing no one else coming up to the table and no one in Las Vegas, I would go to the phone. BPS, is there anyone on the public line for opposition on Senate Bill 109?
To testify in opposition to Senate Bill 109, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue.
CYRUSHOJJACY. I will ditto the previous and future point. Yield.
Thank you for the brevity. Are there other callers on the line for opposition testimony?
Caller with the last number 123, you are unmuted and may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Sienkiewicz, SIENKIEWICZ, and I live in Douglas County. Again, I repeat what the previous folks had testified, that I am not in opposition of organ donation in principle, but I do have concerns with the way that this bill is written. The presenter and others that testified in favor of this bill all made the point that this is a rare situation. So my question would be, why are we legislating for one case per year, as quoted by several of the folks that spoke? The current law requires specific permission for organ donation to be given by the next of kin, and obviously that would align with the deceased person's specific wishes. SB 109 attempts to flip this, and it instead allows organs to be taken in the absence of evidence that the deceased was opposed and in the absence of objection by their family members. It actually takes it one step further and then allows the organ procurement companies, the very companies that profit off of the organ donation, to be allowed to directly approve of an organ donation on behalf of the deceased. If this isn't the fox guarding the henhouse, I really don't know what is. The only thing that they will then need to do is make sure that they can't find any evidence that the deceased was opposed and that there are no family members available to object. What kind of an incentive would these organ procurement companies have to find the next of kin? Mistakes will be made given the time-sensitive nature of organ transplantation. Furthermore, the bill then exempts the coroners and the medical examiners from liability in case they make errors in granting requests.
that are made by the organ procurement companies without the approval of the families. Circumventing the proper permission of the families will certainly result in cases where organs are taken against the will of the deceased and their families. Assemblyman Orentlicker made a very, very good point in that the due diligence steps really should be listed here and defined clearly before we move forward with legislating this change to the organ donation process. It seems to me that there would be better ways to go about increasing voluntary organ donation rather than this, where once again we're talking about the companies that stand to benefit are involved in then actually granting that permission as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. BPS, is there anyone else on the line for opposition testimony?
Chair, there are no callers to testify in opposition at this time.
All right, we will move into neutral testimony. Is there anyone in Carson City or Las Vegas to provide neutral testimony on SB 109? Seeing no one coming to the tables in either location, BPS, is there anyone on the public line who'd like to testify in neutral?
Chair, there are no callers to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much. I would invite the bill sponsor back up for closing remarks.
Thank you. Rochelle Wood for the record. I appreciate all questions and the conversation. I know that this is a very difficult one. I know that it is sensitive. I will tell you it is our intent to put some of those added protections into the law. I am open to having discussions. I will be reaching out to Vice Chair Orentlicker to talk about some of those. I'm always surprised when people want to incorporate more California law into our Nevada revised statutes. So I am open to having those conversations. Obviously, most of the determinations that we made came from having those local conversations with Nevadans that are practicing medicine in Nevada, that are running hospitals in Nevada, that are running organizations like the Nevada Donor Network in Nevada, and transplant patients and donor families in Nevada. And so that's where our intention came in drafting that legislation, that this was a solution to add more protections into our existing law that really reflected our state and not those of those states surrounding us. But I am open to those conversations. I know that there are several members that have already reached out that would like to have continued conversations about this, and I'm definitely open to that. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you so much for being here. We'll go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 109. And that brings us to the end of our hearings on today's agenda and to our last agenda item for public comment. I will start in our physical locations and then go to the phones. Is there anyone in Carson City who would like to provide public comment? And as a note, we do limit public comment to 2 minutes so that we have a fair access to the opportunity to provide public comment. You may also provide public comment in writing to the committee email and in a variety of ways, all listed on the agenda. Seeing no one coming to the table for public comment in Carson City or Las Vegas, I would move to the phones. BPS, is there anyone on the public line to provide public comment today?
If you would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers choosing to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and close public comment, and we will have a meeting scheduled for Friday. It has the potential to be a long one with public testimony, so please plan your travel accordingly. With that, we are adjourned.